Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the Holy Grail. Since I've done it 3 times already, I kind of felt like it was about that time where I should do a video kind of going over some tips and tricks, explaining a couple of things, and yeah, let's get to it. Honestly, this is going to be a little bit longer of a video because there's going to be a little bit of explanation to basically kind of like map out how to go about this in the best possible way. There is basically a couple of ways you can go about it, but let me pull out the notebook here. All right, so when we are starting out our Holy Grail, let's say we do it in offline mode and we're doing it on a completely fresh account, so we have absolutely nothing, and we're basically starting out from complete scratch, right? So the way I would personally go about this is there's 3 basic starters in order to get through the game fairly quickly and without too much pain, and getting to the port of the end game where you can actually grind for gear. So my suggestions goes like this: you either do a Sorc, a Paladin, or an Assassin. Either one of these 3 will be a very good starter, and it'll get to hell fairly quickly and without too much pain. Now, I put the wrong one here. I prefer personally going fire on normal for my Sorceress. So the way I'll do that is I'll go firebolt, fireball, but you could also go lightning here. We'll do light. You could do lightning if you wanted to. It's pretty much same deal. It doesn't really matter which way you go with it. Either or is fine. For the Paladin, I would 100% go Holy Fire. Holy Fire is a massive AoE skill that is really simple for normal, since you won't have any fire immunes really. There's only a few fire immunes throughout the game on normal, and it's usually only the specific bosses in specific areas that'll be fire immune. But I would most certainly go Holy Fire. If I'm doing a Assassin, I would do Fire Blast to begin with, and then once you reach level 12, you go Fire Trap, and that'll carry you through normal. Basically, the same goes for Holy Fire and Lightning for the Sorceress. So once we get past the point of normal, you could say it's not uncommon to be somewhere in the 30 to 40, like level 30 to 40 when you're exiting normal and going into Nightmare. For Nightmare, it's pretty much either you go, depending on which starter you went with. So if you did a fire or a Sorc and you went fire or lightning, I would swap to cold when I do Nightmare and Hell. If I did a Pally, I would swap from Holy Fire to Hammers or Fist of Heavens, and I would do that through Nightmare and Hell. Same goes for the Assassin. I would swap the Assassin from the Fire Traps into the Lightning Traps for Nightmare and Hell, and then Mosaic once you have the runes to do Mosaic instead. That's the basics, right? And you could do, basically you can do a dual spec for the Paladin. You could go Fist of Heaven Smiter, or you can go Hammer Smiter. They both work pretty fucking good, to be honest. So it'll be fairly simple. Cold for the Sorc is kind of tough on Hell, but there's none of the bosses. The act bosses are not cold immune. You will, however, run into a couple of cold immunes in terms of Lester in Chaos, for instance, or the Maggot Lair boss will be cold immune. There's a couple, but you can also do dual spec on the Sorc. So the way to go with that one, in my opinion, is either you go cold and fire, or you go lightning and fire. Either or. And I would do cold orb with fireball, or I would go lightning or charge bolts with the blizzard or the frozen orb, either or would work. And for the Hamadin, which I usually go for when I'm doing a paladin to start out with, it's just nothing is really immune to hammers, right? Like there's only a few enemies in Act 2 and in Act 5 that are immune to hammers, and the rest of them aren't. So you'll have a really easy time getting through Nightmare and Hell, right? Now, for the gear grind itself, like getting to a point where you can move from Nightmare to Hell, in my opinion, what you want to do is you want to grind Andy, Mephisto, Chaos, Bale, and Terrazones. I don't know why I didn't put that here. So basically, that would be my main go-to for Nightmare, to grind out just a little bit of gear in order to settle my resistances, to get enough damage to where it's actually doing some kind of damage in Hell, and then having some survivability in terms of life and whatnot. So once you get to Nightmare, I would start out by grinding Andy a little bit, then move to Chaos as fast as I can, and then Terrazones and Bale for the rest of it. And then once you kind of reach the point of being able to like go from Nightmare into Hell, you don't have to be like super high level or have like super crazy gear to get to a point in Hell where you can actually grind the more high-end gear, right? So I would personally start out by grinding Andy, depending on, of course, which build I'm on. But let's say we're going for the Sorceress. I would start out with Andy, and I would do Countess and LK runs, right? Like Lower Kuras. So I would do these three for the most part, and then I would trip Mephisto, and then kill him for the last couple of items. I would, like, I'm in dire need of. Let's say you're looking for Shaco or like more travelers or some specific like that, right? And if I am doing a paladin, so going the Hammers of Fist of Heavens, I would 100% go and do Chaos runs and Terrazones instead of doing LK and Mephisto and Andy, just because these kind of takes a little bit longer when you don't have teleport, right? So I would keep to Chaos and Terrazones for Paladin and for the Assassin as well. Either or, I would go with Terrazones and Chaos, and then Sork I would do the others, and then basically what you're grinding for is Enigma, right? So if you're doing the Sork to start with, then you're grinding for Enigma and then making one of the other two, or basically you're making one of the other three, or you grind for gear for the Sorceress, so you can change your Sork from the cold spec into lightning or fire. Fire actually being the one that I prefer nowadays. But that would be the basics, and you go to Chaos for getting your bases, so you can get your insight and stuff like that set up, get your runewords in place, the spots where they need. So once you do get to the point where you have grinded out the gear, you've gotten to a point where you can actually like kill everything in Hell, and you don't have too much of an issue, then I would start basically focusing in on which type of build am I going to use to grind the Holy Grail. And in my opinion, there is really only a couple of builds that'll do it at a reasonable rate. So in terms of finding your Griffins, Tyrael's Might, and those type of TC 87 items, which is treasure class, right? TC is treasure class. To find those type of items, you kind of want to have a lot of magic find. So I would personally go for either a Sork or a Pit Zerker Barbarian with a bunch of magic find, right? And then I would go Mosaic or Hammer and Smiter for basically for grinding runes and grinding out certain bases and grinding your keys to do your Ubers, grinding the Uber Diablo clone, or a couple of other things that you can use these for that are just where they're just way better in my opinion than the Pit Zerker and the Sorceress will be, just in terms of speed and like survivability and how fast it actually clears the map. But you would probably want to go with the Pit Zerker as your Magic Find character, and then preferably one of the others for finding runes and doing certain things like Ubers and stuff. Sorc and Ubers are not the best mix, but Mosaic and Paladin are super easy to do Ubers with. So that's how I would personally go about it. And I would do a Pit Zerker and a Mosaic and a Cold Sorc. That would be my number one setup. And then I'm just going to use the Cold Sorc to get gear for the Mosaic and the Pit Zerker. And then I'm going to use the Mosaic for Ubers and clones and a little bit more high-end areas where the Pit Zerker might not shine as much, if you know what I mean. And then I would use the Pit Zerker to find all my uniques that I like, the griffins and stuff like that. And the way I would be grinding it in this order too, I would 100% grind as much terrorized Andariel as physically possible. That is the number one spot to get your griffins, to get your Tyraels and your Death Fathom and all of these stupid hard to get uniques. By far the best place, in my opinion, is Terrorized Andy. And the second best would be Terrorized Chaos, then Terrorized Bales, then Pits, and then Arachnid Lair in Act 3. That would be my go-to places. So I would, every time there is a TC on Bale, Diablo, or Andy, I would go there immediately and I would grind the whole hour on the Pit Zerker. Or on the Mosaic, depending on which one it is. Because if it's Bale, for instance, I probably would want to go on the Mosaic or the Hamadin over using the Pit Zerker. But if it's Andy or if it's Chaos, I would definitely go for the Pit Zerker over the Mosaic, just because you can like really quickly seal pop Chaos with a Pit Zerker, and you can really quickly get to Andy with a Pit Zerker. So that would be, in my opinion, the number one way to go about doing your Holy Grail if you are looking to do that. And we can kind of go over the builds a little bit just quickly. So first and foremost would be the Sorceress. Now, of course, this ain't super fair to be looking at because of how much I have actually grinded on these characters. So they are really like geared, right? Like they have fairly decent gear on right now. But basically you would have your Cold Sorc and then respec this into something else if you find the gear for it. So I would wait to make that decision until I had grinded X amount of gear, and then once I have a certain like amount of gear, then I'll make the decision if I'm going coal, lighting, or fire. But if you have a cold sunder, going coal is very viable, but I feel like it's less powerful and it has less survivability than the Fire Sorc. So the reason I think the Fire Sorc is better is mainly because of Phoenix. Phoenix is such a good item in terms of regaining your mana and life from the Redemption Aura that it's just, it's hard to beat. This is very, very hard to beat. But yeah, I would probably go Fire Sorc, honestly, because of how fairly simple the gear is. The only really harsh part about this gear is getting Phoenix. But you're able to kind of grind that out semi-fast if you're doing, like, let's say a lot of chaos or a lot of lower Kuras. You would be able to gain Vex Low Jar fairly quickly, and you would be able to get the pull on Vex fairly quickly as well. And that's the only two real runewords that this build needs in order to perform at a very, very high level. And past those two runewords, everything else is just more survivability and a little bit more damage. And you really don't need infinity when you have the Fire Sunder. So it actually, it's really, really a simple build. And that's why I love it, because lightning is a lot different, and it takes a lot more gear in order to make a lightning sword. I do believe I have one right here. Right, so this, of course I'm holding the infinity right now, but I could technically swap that for something else, and then put the infinity over on my mercenary. But it's just this gear is super, super harsh to come by, a lot of it. It's super expensive too, and given that it's this expensive, kind of like tells you how hard it is to come by. So, but technically we could swap it for a spirit and Hodo, right? Like, and have that on instead. But yeah, so as I said, I think, in my opinion, Cold and Fire is the best choice. Lightning is only if you are super lucky and you drop like Griffins really early on, for instance. I would consider going Lightning for the Sorceress. Now, for the Pit Zerker, it's a lot more simple in terms of gearing him. So, Grief is kind of necessary, and Enigma is kind of necessary. But that's like the two parts that's 100% needed, you could say, right? The rest of it is just bonus gear that gives you more magic find, basically. So, I would certainly try to gear out this character. You do not need to have dual Hodos. You can have two Wizard Spikes instead. That would be equally as useful. And two Wizard Spikes with Enigma is going to tap out your resistances and max out your faster cast rate. You only need like I'm pretty sure Arachnids would be enough, or two faster cast rings would be enough. And then basically you're just grinding for some 7 magic find small charms and filling out your inventory. And honestly, that is a extremely nice magic find character. We are at 647 magic find, which is pretty decent. So to take this, for instance, and start grinding pits or chaos or certain terror zones and stuff like that, it's really simple, right? Like, it's not hard at all. You could use this for grinding lower Kurist as well if you have Enigma already. It's pretty fucking simple then, but getting to the Enigma is the real hurdle on your Holy Grail. For the Mosaic, it's a lot simpler too, since we only really need dual Mosaics. Is like the main feature of the build. You don't even need Enigma. It definitely is so much nicer once you have Enigma, but if you're doing Chaos and stuff like that, or Bale, or a Terror Zone, it's not super needed. It's fairly doable without Enigma. It's just getting the 2 Mosaics that's the important part, but you can add that to any claw you want to. It does not have to have any type of skills on it. It doesn't need anything else. Just have any 3 open socket claw and put them in, and you're good to go. That's all it takes. And then everything else is basically just adding more damage. It's not super necessary, but it's useful. And this is basically the cheapest build that perform, like, I don't know if I want to say it's the cheapest build, but it's one of, if not the cheapest build, to get to a point where you can just blast through everything in the game. Only really the Hammerden, I think, is one of the few builds that'll be able to keep up with this once you have the mosaics. But yeah, that's how I personally would go about doing a Holy Grail if I were to do another one. I did two. I did two offlines, one on normal, one on softcore and one on hardcore, and I did a online Holy Grail that took me season 1, season 2, and season 3 to complete. In season 3, I got the last couple of items, which I was like missing. It was griffins. I believe it was griffins, Death Fathom, and what's the last one I was missing? The big staff, the big sorceress staff. I forget what it's called right now. That was my 3 last. It's an Astraean war staff or some shit like that. I don't remember the real name of it. But that was the last 3 items I was missing, and I got them in season 3. So it's doable online too. It's not like it's not. It just takes a lot more effort and time to get there because you don't have the player 8 guarantee. So you kind of have to grind in either bail runs, or you just grind play as 1 and hope for the best. So, but it took me a long time to get that online one done. But that was my 3rd time I did it, and now I feel like I've done every type of Grail there is. I've done the offline, I've done the online, I've done the softcore, I've done the hardcore, and I kind of wish that I had planned everything out beforehand, because not last time I did it, but the previous one that was on hardcore, I didn't plan everything out before I started, and that kind of killed a lot of time for me, just because I got to points where I was like a little confused on where should I go next, what should I do next, what should be my next move, and having to sit there and think about it without having a plan already in place is kind of not very good for you if you want to do it at a within a reasonable amount of time, right? Make sure to lay out a plan, what you're gonna do when you get to this point, what you're gonna do when you get to that point, what will be your grinding characters, what will be your Grail characters, what will be your, you know what I mean, plan everything out beforehand, and then make sure you have a couple of choices for each point, so you're not hard stuck on something and you can't move past that. But besides that, that's gonna be all for this video. If you do have some questions in terms of loot, gear, builds, whatever it might be, do hit me up. Leave a like and a comment and subscribe if you like what you've seen, and then I'll catch you all in the next one. Have a great one.